All right, hello everyone. Episode 5 of the Samurai Brothers Wrestling Podcast, and it was a wild weekend for the NCAA Division I Championships, and that's going to be our episode today, mainly talking about what happened during that tournament. After that, we'll cover a few things, some news-related tidbits here and there. But Matthew, this is very much the end of season tournament. You get high school going, you get out here in California, the community colleges have their own season that happens. You've got NCAA, which is the national tournament for the junior colleges. You've got the NAIA division, and then you've got D3 and D2 divisions that go through their championship tournaments as well. But
you forgot the NCAA.
Yes, of course, the NCAA. My apologies. Yes,
probationary and club teams.
And actually, there also is the NCWC, which is the current women's college championship right now as well. It's not NCAA, but it's very much actually I think it's the WCWC as well.
Yeah, it's the WC. I think it's the WCWA, something like that.
So anyway, these organizations all go through everything, but the folk style season pretty much ends with the NCAA Division I tournament. And Matthew, as you know, last week we have all the big players coming in trying to see if would Iowa be repeating their championship from last year. Would Penn State be coming back with a vengeance? We saw that Michigan unseeded Penn State and Iowa at the Big Ten. So were they going to carry that momentum going into the NCAA tournament? You had all these other programs they were wanting to make some noise. NC State, which had been emerging very much, they dominated the ACC in fashion. And so what were going to be the cards that were being played? Who was going to win out? Who was going to be upset? So I think let's get into that. Matthew, I think, again, it's always exciting to see. You had the opportunity even to go watch the NCAA tournament when you were out back east wrestling. And, to just going and being able to see that, Matt, before we get into the actual action from this weekend, what is it like when you go to the NCAA Division I tournament and going and watching it live? What does that feel like?
Well, it's definitely a unique experience because it's the only time that you can guarantee that the arena is going to be sold out. It depends on what program. Some programs, they sell out every single, like the upper echelon ones like Oklahoma State, Iowa, Penn State. It's those powerhouses sell out their arenas all the time. But there's one time when a tournament is guaranteed to sell out. And to be perfectly honest, if you look at even some of the Oklahoma State duels, they aren't always filled out. Bedlam, definitely, between them and Oklahoma, some of the other high-level ones. But the only one where you're guaranteed to see a sold-out arena is the NCAA Division I Championship, where you're just seeing mats all over the place and everyone's wrestling and all the teams are there. And especially when you get into the finals where it's the one mat in the middle. It's the closest thing to, aside from the Flow Wrestling events, where it just looks like one of those special events where everyone's in there. All the teams are there. They're all cheering. The only time that this happens, everyone from around the country, it's there. It's the national tournament.
Well, and before we get in the action, another thing I want to point out is when I was watching the broadcast last night of the finals, and so they had showed the attendance numbers, and it was consistently over 35,000, over 35,000 on days 1 and 2, but then it went up to 36,000. So a lot of people want to get in there. They want to see what's going on. I do know that a school that has consistently carried the best attendance record out of all the schools across the nation has been Iowa. They're able to fill up Carver Arena with 10,000 plus a lot of the times when they're dueling. So, but it's always great to see people going in there, always being united behind this, this sport that, hey, it's people really just duking it out on the mat, trying to see who is the better wrestler. So thanks, Matt, for that, just giving that first person perspective. So let's go into first, the first couple of things we want to cover that I thought would be interesting to talk about will be, how the standings were going for the teams, and then, just notable upsets. And when I'm going to talk about upsets, I'm going to be really going into, because within the last few years, the committee that makes the, the brackets and stuff, they've seeded everyone in the tournament, kind of like how they do with the NCAA Division I basketball tournament. They will seed everyone in the wrestling brackets from 1 down to 33 because they allow 33 people per bracket. So, but when I'm going to talk about upsets, normally it would be when you're on paper, when you're going to have people making the quarterfinals on paper, it should be 1 through 8. So, if a 20 some odd seed is going to upset some seed that's in the teens, I don't know if I would really consider that an upset, at least from my perspective. So that's why when I list who's going to be upset, it will basically be, any seed from 1 to 8, at least on day 1, that did not make the quarterfinals. So with that being said, what we saw here on day 1, first of all, was Penn State was the leader. And after day 1, the scores weren't very high, because you're just getting your first couple of rounds in, you're getting your people in the quarterfinals and such. So, at that point, it would be considered a close race. You're looking at Penn State. They had 26 team points, and they had 6 wrestlers make the quarterfinals, and they had 3 wrestlers in the consolation brackets. In second place, you had Arizona State with 21.5 points, 5 in the quarters, 2 in consoles. 3, you had the surprise Big Ten winner, Michigan, only a half point behind ASU at 21 points, 7 in the quarters, 2 in consolation. Fourth place was Iowa with 20 points, 6 in the quarters, 4 in the consolations. And your 5th place team was NC State with 16.5 points, 4 in the quarters, 6 in cons. Now, at this point, Matthew, when you're seeing how the teams are looking, does it come as any surprise that, Penn State would be leading the way they are after day 1? And you've got these other teams that are pretty much trying to represent, but 3 of them are Big Ten. But you got NC State trying to pull up, to make the noise that, we had discussed last week. What do you think of how the standings were going so far at that time?
Well, it looked like there was the possibility that it could have been anyone's game, but at that point, with the consistency of Penn State and the Big Ten teams, it was pretty obvious that it was probably going to be one of the Big Ten teams. Or that's a Big Ten or Big Ten? Big Ten. It
Yes.
was going to be one of the Big Ten teams. And ultimately, that proved to be the case. And I legitimately don't know what exactly NC State could accomplish, because again, they had all 10, but as we've talked about before, the ACC is not known for its wrestling. It's known for other sports. And while NC State's performance was definitely spectacular and impressive for the ACC, unfortunately, like I said, it's the ACC. So ultimately their qualifying 10, it made for, in theory, the possibility of an upset. But again, this is one of those things where it has to be an across the bracket thing. If you just take 10 people and you have a few of them go 2 and out, then it's, ultimately wouldn't matter.
Well, and that could almost translate to, kind of going back to the California state finals where, you had Poway. They did take all 14, and Buchanan was kind of at a disadvantage, even though they ended up winning the tournament. But Poway ended up not getting anyone into the finals, which was a real big hurt for them. So again, you're right. Numbers don't necessarily translate to the getting the final results. It's how good your guys are ultimately going to be, when they get to that big tournament, right?
Yeah, ultimately, you might have an easier path to taking most, if not all, your people to the the championship. But if you don't produce at the actual event, then the hype is kind of pointless.
So let's go through the upsets, of the top 8 seeds, because what we saw was there were none of the weight classes didn't have at least one top 8 seed not make the quarterfinals. And so going into this, what we saw was the 125-pound weight class was one of 2 weight classes that had at least 3 seeds not make the quarters. And that was number 6 Barnett of Wisconsin, number 7 Mastro Giovanni of Oklahoma State, and number 8 McKee of Minnesota. So for them, though, it wasn't, these were wrestlers that very sure, wrestled their hearts out, but it seems like, they got undone by some of the wrestlers under them. And then at 133 pounds, you had the 7 and 8 seeds, which was Bird of Illinois, Foley of Michigan State. So we haven't really seen any of the top contender teams losing any of their guys just yet. But Matthew, as we were updating each other, it was the 2 seed Ironman of Iowa who lost his round of 16 match, and he actually lost it to the number 15 seed from North Carolina, who was Clark, and then also the number 5 seed of Alvarez, who was University of Northern Colorado, and number 7 seed of Carlson from South Dakota State. So Matthew, at this point, Ironman, who's supposed to be one of the top guys for Iowa, has lost this. So do you think that this could cause some concern for Iowa when they're trying to be a contender for the championship?
Well, yeah, you have one of your best guys who is supposed to potentially be winning it, and all of a sudden he gets an upset in the quarters. It's just like, uh-oh, what are we supposed to do? Because you've only got so many people in there, and if even one of them in a close match, a close race as it was, even falters, then forget even competing for the top of the podium. You're looking at, well, are we even going to make like second? Are we even going to be in contention for the podium? So in a potentially close race, one win can make a difference.
Well, and that would go to being said, because I am looking at I'm kind of pulling up the brackets right now, and this match wasn't a dominant match. Clark ended up having to, they went to sudden victory, and Clark was able to get the takedown. So ended up being a 4-2 match as the result. Now, I will not to take any credit away from Clark, but it does seem that at least some reports I was hearing was that Ironman was hurt, going into this tournament, and so he was having to fight through injury the way that he was, and that can cause an effect on how you end up wrestling. So possibly that it seems that Clark may have been the wrestler in better shape than Ironman because of that, and I think you know that from experience. When you had to try and fight through injuries, you didn't perform as well, and it's a grind. It's a grind to try and get through that, don't you think?
Yeah, and I was fortunate in that the 2 years I had injuries, one for high school, one for college, they happened earlier in the season. So ultimately, by the time the postseason came around, it didn't affect me as much. But still, if you're going with a nagging injury into the championship, it's not gonna go very well, and you're just not gonna wrestle at your best. So, but therein lies whether your opponent can take advantage of that and just wrestle the best they can, which is what Clark was able to do against Ironman.
So then when we go from 149 up to 165, there was only one top 8 seed that lost in each of those weight classes, not making the quarterfinals. You had Milner from Appalachian State, who was the number 6 seed at 49s. You had Conegliaro, I'm sorry if I got the name wrong, from Harvard, who was the number 8 seed at 165. So, but then the surprise at 157 was Carr from Iowa State, who was the number 1 seed, ended up losing. And if I'm going into the bracket, and Matthew, he lost a 2-1 match on the tiebreaker. The way that went was they wrestled through the Sun victory, and Willits, who upset him from Oregon State, got his escape, but was able, from how I'm reading that, was able to ride him out to get that 2-1 victory. And I think sometimes that's just a will of power, don't you think, to be able to ride out the number 1 ranked person in your weight class?
Yeah, well, especially if you're talking about, if you're ranked number 1, you're usually pretty good at both escapes and takedowns. So the fact that he was able to come away with that just goes to show how good of a wrestler he is. So, and it just goes to show that the pulling off an upset, that's where it's one of those times where you just have to pull out everything you've got and trying to hold out on something like that.
One of those the kitchen sink moment, right?
Yeah, just throw everything out there.
And I'm looking at the stats. So basically, I'm looking at it like this. There was no obviously no scoring Sun victory. Carr had the first choice, so he put down and he got ridden out. And here's where it must have been a crazy match, because when I'm looking at the track wrestling result, Willits, who upset Carr, got out with 1 second remaining in the period. Now, I'm very sure that must have been crazy. I'm almost certain that maybe Iowa State tried to challenge that, although I don't know. I don't know for certain if that was the case, but that must have been some pandemonium for Oregon State when Willits got his escape like that, don't you think?
Well, yeah, because at that point, there's your point, and then you got to take riding into consideration. And if you've got 1 point and the riding, if you're leading high enough to where the riding point doesn't come into effect, that's just one of those things where it's like finding the time to actually get out is where that comes into play. Like we've mentioned my badly officiated Masters match. If I'd actually gotten out, then it would have gone to at minimum gone to some victory. Right. So it just goes to show how stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just how you wrestle, how you end up scoring your points. Yeah, I know that. I've been in there before, a couple times, and sometimes, especially when like I know that I lost a couple matches when I would be going out and doing the freestyle tournaments, but the coaches that ran the thing didn't really bring anyone in that knew how to officiate, so they'd just be having some of their freshman or sophomore wrestlers going out there and trying to do, officiating matches, and they're not going to know everything. They're not going to know like a stall call or something, or a really close, scramble. So they're not going to know what to do. So you got to make sure that you're clearly dominant, when trying to me, I think instead of trying to wrestle a close match or something, I think going out there, especially when you can dominate your opponent, I think is an important one to show that, you're leaving less room for controversy, or you're leaving less room for a possible heartbreak, like the way that, this match may have gone. So with that being said, just to kind of round out everything, so there wasn't really any big upsets except for 197. You had 174, the 7 and 8 seeds lost, which was Smith of Ohio State, O'Malley from Drexel. 184, Iowa State, another blow. They did lose Coleman, who was their 8 seed. So Iowa State was out. At heavyweights, you had Stencil from Central Michigan. And also at heavyweight, he was the 8 seed. He lost out. But then you had at 197, you had the 5 seed Bonacorsi from Pitt. But then here's where it got bad for Michigan, is that they lost their number 4 seed Brucky. So he was not able to reach the quarterfinals. So Matthew, at that point, Iowa takes their hit, but now it's Michigan's turn to take their hit. And do you think that's gonna make it tough for them to try and get into the race, don't you think? Especially if they're losing a top 8 seed.
Yeah, it was one of those things where Michigan and Iowa, they didn't really have much margin for error. Like I said, the Big Tens was an upset. So it's like if they wanted to be able to pull another upset, they would have had to been all wrestling their best. And if they weren't wrestling their best, then, well, Michigan just wasn't going to be able to pull it off. So,
all right. So with that being said, I want to move into day 2. So day 2, I first want to go over what happened, who upset who, and then we'll kind of review what the team scores was, because then that's going to really tell us how the race was going into for the final day. So just going into it, Matthew, what we saw was that the going at 125s first. So pretty much going into the semifinals, all top 4 seeds made the semifinals at 125. So you had Suriano, who was the champion at 133 back in 2019. He had actually been at Rutgers before he decided to transfer to Michigan following getting another year of eligibility from COVID. But I think one of the things that he had been doing, it seems to me, was that, because he had wrestled at 133s, he won the championship at 133s. It almost seems to me that he might have been avoiding Spencer Lee, because Spencer Lee had a 3-peat going from his side. Although Suriano was also kind of dealing with DeSanto from Iowa also. But so you've got him, you've got Courtney from ASU, the 4 seed. You got Glory from Princeton, who, I don't know how much you would say that you see a lot of, Ivy League schools, aside from Cornell, getting this far in the tournament. But Glory was certainly showing why he was the 3 seed. And then you had Arujo from Cornell. So you had an EIWA matchup right there on that side of the bracket. In the end, it was Suriano, decision Courtney, and then you had Glory from Princeton, who major decision Arujo, 13-5 to advance to the finals. So Suriano coming back, trying to go for a second title. And then you got Glory from Princeton, who, makes a statement, from the Ivy League that, hey, we've got someone in the finals right there. So, this is, Matthew, what do you think just right there, because I can't remember. We'll obviously have to go back and look at the, stats and stuff. But, to have Princeton in there besides Cornell being in there, what do you think of that so far that, you have this matchup 1 versus 3?
Well, there's obviously cases where one individual is going to do well enough to where they're going to be able to go in there, and despite coming from a school that's not necessarily known for its high-level wrestling, are going to be able to pull off something that they would not normally do, which is, in this case, to get someone in the finals. Now, obviously, one thing to remember is that once upon a time, the Ivy League was known for its athletics because that was essentially all of the athletics that was out there, was these guys who were in college. But that was the turn of the century, and that was at a time when things were not structured the way they are now. So it was easy for these guys who are going in there, and they're in there to get an education. That's what it was at the time.
Right.
It's not like now where, the top guys are looking to do their minimum amount of schooling and then go into the pros. I know that at one point the NBA was poaching guys straight from high school, and then they changed the rule, said, no, these guys need to do some kind of after high school work. Like, I think Kobe was probably one of the last guys who was poached via that way. Mm-hmm. So, these guys are looking to do their minimum number of years and see if they can't do that. If not, maybe do 3 or 4. But the reality is, yeah. So at a time when, so it's just not that normal to see the Ivy League excel in athletics, with the exception of Cornell wrestling nowadays, where, like we said a few years ago, they were in the fight. They placed second in the national tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, because it's the Ivy League, you need to have the best of grades in order to get into those schools. So the fact that you had someone else from another Ivy League school in there is impressive in and of itself.
Well, and that was kind of riding onto that, because you had Dake, I believe. Dake was from Cornell, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, he did do Cornell.
Yeah, so he was from Cornell. So, and I would probably say one of the most famous wrestlers out of that school right now. But we have some other wrestlers that are on the up and coming, which I'll be talking about shortly. So yeah, so you got Soriano versus Glory in the 125 finals. So then, which took place yesterday, which we'll talk about in a bit. At 133, I don't know if I would really, make this out to be an upset, but you had DeSanto, who was the number 5 seed, Flow Wrestling's, bad boy, as they were likening him to, something about a need for WWE style promotion or whatever. I'm not really big into that, but,
especially not in wrestling, or our type of.
So goes without saying, but he pulled a win over Myers, who from Virginia Tech, who was the number 4 seed going into the tournament. With that being said, though, DeSanto's been very competitive all the way through. So, him not being able to beat, Roman Bravo Young, who is, from Penn State, even at the Big Tens, because they met in the finals. So I don't know how much I would constitute that being an upset. For all I know, it may have been DeSanto should have been the number 4 seed. But because in the end, what ends up happening is, he faces Roman Bravo Young in the semis, and pretty much the same result that happens at the Big Tens. RBY, is just too much the better wrestler going into this tournament, knowing DeSanto, knowing how he wrestles and stuff, knowing what DeSanto has in his arsenal, which is why RBY beats DeSanto by a score of, let me make sure I'm getting into it. Yes, it was a 3-2 decision. Pretty much the same thing as the Big Ten going into. So RBY's the first finalist at 133. Then you got Dayton Fix from Oklahoma State, pretty much going in there. He gets paired up with McGee, who is the number 3 seed from Arizona State. And Fix goes out and he does what he does. And, not a, I don't know if I can say a dominant match. I didn't see everything, but 5-1 margin, victory, especially in a semifinals, I think proves that Fix was the better wrestler going into this. And so you've got a rematch of last year's finals, which also was RBY versus Fix, and RBY ended up winning that one on a takedown. So, I mean, Matthew, when you see this and when you see the work that these guys are putting in, are you surprised that we would again have a rematch of last year, that it's just number 1 and number 2 again?
I mean, not really. I mean, these guys go in there and they put in the effort, and it's like at some point they're going to meet again. So that's just how things go. I mean, I remember having to wrestle guys multiple times in the postseason, sometimes within the same tournament. So it's just not that uncommon. If the guys are going to go in there, they're the top of their weight class and they put in the effort, and they're the technical guys that they are, then guess what? They're gonna meet again.
So 141, clearly the upsets that were happening there. Well, we had one upset. How much of it would be how it would be considered an upset? Who knows? But yeah, number 6 seed Matthews of Pitt over Sebastian Rivera of Rutgers, who was the number 3 seed. That happened in the quarterfinals. But he ended up meeting Nick Lee from, actually, no, I got that wrong. That was the other one. So Matthews was actually in the semis, and he was matched up with the this year's wrestling version of the Cinderella story. And that was, obviously, as we've already been talking about, Kizan Clark from UNC. And apparently he had been, I was reading about his story and stuff. Apparently he had been an American earlier, but he's at UNC right now, and he's actually going to law school. So very well-educated wrestler, just going into this thing. And it looks like he's, having fun. He upset Ironman early on in the tournament, but then he goes on, he upsets Berglund from Minnesota, the number 10 seed, and then he upsets Matthews, the number 6 seed from Pitt. And so, this is just, and so you have the number 15 seed in the finals against Nick Lee, who is the undisputed number 1 wrestler at the 141-pound weight class. Now, I mean, Matthew, this, I think we always love to see an underdog, get as far as they do. And apparently this is the lowest seeded wrestler to make the finals since they started seeding everyone. Because there have been before that, I think they had only seeded down to either 8 or 16. And I think they had unseeded wrestlers making the finals in the past. But I think, this just goes to show sometimes when you really get hot, you're going to get hot, don't you think?
I mean, yeah, if you just keep going, and sometimes it takes that postseason run to be able to finally pull it together. But yeah, they've started seeding them for a reason to the last man. And obviously, most of the time, those seeds work, but there's cases like this where someone pulls a Cinderella upset and is able to make it into the finals. So obviously, there's a first time for everything, and this was the case here.
So at 149, you had Yanni Giacomalis from Cornell, the number one, I think, undisputed wrestler at 149 pounds, making his way into the finals. Was there anyone that was upset going into this before him? Not really, although except for the fact that you had Andonian, who was from Virginia Tech, able to, he had actually pulled an upset over Milner, who was the number 6 seed. But then he upset Gomez, the number 3 seed from Wisconsin, to get into the semis, and he actually beat him by fall with 30 seconds left in the match. So that right there, you know, I don't know how the match was going, although if we're looking into it. So it looks to me like the score, Andonian was actually winning this match before he got the fall, because it looks like he was up 6-4. His opponent took down, so he's up 6-5, and then he scores a takedown, scores near fall, and then he gets the pin. So, you know, clearly he was, you know, dominating his opponent even before he got the fall, and then he upsets. But unfortunately for Andonian, he was beaten by Lovett, who was the number 10 seed. So you had an 11 and a 10 matchup for the semis. So you were already going to have a double-digit matchup. You were already going to have a double-digit seed for the second weight class in a row making the finals. And so I think when you see stuff like that, it just, you know, it makes for a really interesting matchup, don't you think?
Yeah, again, this just goes back to, you know, guys fighting it in themselves to be able to go in there and out wrestle the better seeds. But you don't see that in 2 weight classes in a row. That normally doesn't happen. So the fact that this is happening is quite impressive.
So you got Giacomalis from Cornell, sorry, and then he's going against Lovett from Nebraska, going into the 149 files. 157, you know, not really. I think 157, 165, or I'm sorry, 157 first. How much of an upset you would say it, I don't know. But you've got Glory from Princeton, you know, winning over Scott from NC State. And this is where it's hurting NC State, the fact that they're having one of their guys losing in the quarters, you know, to not be able to make the, you know, finals, you know, trying to add, you know, because they want to try and get a top 5 finish or so. But Quincy Monday from Princeton ended up upsetting Scott from NC State. And here's something of a bit of flashback or throwback. Is Quincy Monday is the son of Kenny Monday, who was a national champion at Oklahoma State. So, you know, right there you've got some generational, you know, you've got some generational things happening here with father and son trying to repeat as national champions. So, and Monday had, you know, maybe a bit of an easier path than, you know, you could almost say he had an easier path to the finals because he was not having to compete against Carr, who was upset early on in the tournament. But he still did have to go against the number 8 seed Lewin from Michigan, and he only won by 3-2. So it was not as easy as it might seem. You know, it was a pretty hard-fought match there. Then he's going to be matched up against Deacon, who's the number 2 seed from Northwestern. Deacon very much doing his thing. He doesn't seem to be in any danger at any time. The worst result he seems to have had was a 6-2 win, and that was twice on his way to the finals. He major decision his semis opponent 10-2. And I think, Matthew, 10-2 in a semifinals match, you really can't argue that, don't you think?
Yeah, that's just not that common to happen where someone dominates a semifinals match in that capacity.
To get and there's always it always seems to be what's really tough is getting that crossing that threshold. I almost seem to think that it's easier to win by 7 points in college than it is by 8. Just that 8th match, because that right there is going to be bonus points. And I think sometimes I've seen where wrestlers will really fight to keep from getting majored.
Well, yeah, because they don't want to give away those points, and that normally just does not happen. So somehow, if they're able to stop that from happening, they will do it. But in this case, it did not happen. So yeah, it was impressive that they were able to pull that off.
Okay, so at 165 pounds, so this is where things started to get crazy. And it was, you had Evan Wick, who was the number 1 seed, made it all the way to the semifinals. And he was up against Shane Griffith from Stanford. And he in turn had upset Hamidi from Wisconsin, who was the 4 seed. Griffith is the 5th seed going into this tournament. Now, one thing that I was hearing on the broadcast yesterday, because what ended up happening was Griffith from Stanford ended up upsetting Wick, the number 1 seed from Cal Poly, by a 7-6 decision. And so he is going to be, he ends up being in the finals. And the significance about Griffith is that he actually won the national championship last year for Stanford, because Matthew, if you remember, Stanford had announced that they were cutting the program due to COVID-19. Well, a lot of people,
COVID-19 budget cuts.
Yes.
Let's be clear about that.
And Griffith. So when Stanford was at the national tournament, everyone knows that, hey, the program's going away. So they couldn't even go out and wear singlets with the Stanford logo on there.
They chose to do that. They were doing that in protest. Like, if you guys are not gonna keep us, then we're not going to acknowledge they chose to do that. It was not something that was instituted on them by the NCAA or the
Well, I remember how because I did actually have the opportunity to watch some of the earlier days and the results of what were going on, and I could see that there were a lot of wrestlers and teams out there that were really supportive of Stanford. Ended up being just the sportsmanship towards the wrestlers out there at that tournament last year was just phenomenal, I think. And one of the things that the broadcasters were crediting Griffith with being one of the driving forces behind saving the program, because he goes out there and he wins, a national title for the team. And Matthew, I think if you remember, there was another program this was, I believe, back in the 80s or early 90s. There was a program that had a wrestler go out and win a national title, and then the next year they cut the program. Just, zip, zilch, shut down. And that was UCLA, which was another, back then, currently Pac-12 team.
I thought that was in the 80s or 70s.
Yes, that's why I said 80. Well, I originally said 80s or 90s, but yeah, it was around that time frame that, yes, they have a wrestler go out and win a national championship, and then they get rid of the program. So I don't know if that that I'm very sure that had nothing, kind of a repeat of history was really not on the Stanford athletics minds when that happened. But I think though that a lot of people definitely stood up and said that this can't happen. And I think, Griffith going out there and winning the national title, hopefully was one of the driving factors behind convincing Stanford athletics that they shouldn't be doing that.
Well, remember, there was a drive from all of the alumni, because remember, Stanford wasn't just cutting wrestling. They were cutting, I can't remember all of them, but they had something like, and this is very unusual because Stanford has 33 athletic programs. They were going to cut 30 of them. They were going to cut a third of their athletic programs. So the alumni for all of these programs were like, no, you're not going to do this. There were multiple fundraising attempts from wrestling, from, I think, fencing was one of the things. These programs were all going to get cut, and all the alumni from all the athletic programs were like, no, we're not going to let this happen. And remember, when you're talking about Stanford, you're not going there to get, some bizarre like sociology degree and just go out and do nothing. You're going out there to become like, you're going out there to study to become, to go into business, to go into administration. You're going to science. You're going out in there to study to be a high earning person. So that's what these people had become. So they raised all this money, and then Stanford's like,
well, one thing I can't understand, for the university that has the most on record, the most national titles, what is there to gain, especially if some of these now I don't know if any of the programs that won the national titles were on the chopping block, but you would think that the school that is on paper, on record, the most successful school in athletics in the NCAA, why would you want to do that to your athletics program as a whole?
Well, clearly this was a situation where, all these athletes were hurt, the athletes, the alumni, and everything like that, and they were able to stop it from happening. So,
yeah, you would wish that, administrations would have been listened to places like, Fullerton, UC Davis, Boise State,
Well, especially like UC Davis, because UC Davis said, "Oh, we're gonna cut it. No option for
no opportunity.
Self-funding," which is what Fullerton was able to do for a year. They self-funded. Unfortunately, they weren't able to keep going.
Well, in my mind, I think what was scummy about the whole thing is that, and this is from insider information that I know of, is that the Fullerton Athletics kept raising the bar for how much money needed to be raised. And so I think that, they had gotten at least a year out of raising that money. And I remember how the NCAA, did an all-star event, at, Fullerton, for the, and with the intent and purpose of trying to raise money for them. But, and I'm an alumni of Cal State Fullerton, so I was able to follow the situation somewhat. But I think just them continually raising the bar and stuff, I think that they had no intent of wanting to keep the program.
Well, wasn't part of the problem that they cut the women's gymnastics, who ironically enough, the men's, why am I doing what was the coach's name? Dan Hicks. My understanding was their women's gymnastics program was coached by his wife.
Yes.
Ironically enough. So they cut both those programs.
Yeah. Sometimes you just can't understand things the way people an administration will think about things.
It is sketchy though that they kept moving the goalposts like that. I really don't like it when goalposts are moved. It's like, make up your mind.
Yeah, either you want us or you don't want us. Which, hey, Davis was like, no.
Yeah, they didn't even give an opportunity for fundraising, which there could have been the opportunity, but
what I don't like, is I don't like goalposts being moved. I also don't like when you get a last minute cut and there's no explanation. So anyway, moving back to the finals, but it's a very important discussion to have, I think, just how wrestling programs are affected like this. But so you got Griffith, who, hey, he's trying to get back into the title race again. He upsets Wick from Cal Poly, and he's going to be up against O'Toole, Keegan O'Toole from Missouri. And remember, Matthew, Missouri claimed the Big 12 title in their first year back in the conference. And
which they hadn't been able to do while they were in conference. They hadn't even been able to win the were they in SoCon? Was it? Or
they were in the MAC.
They weren't even able to do that in the MAC, and the MAC was a very
MAC is a mid-tier. MAC is a mid-tier conference.
The competition level is low.
So, but you got this kid, Keegan O'Toole, freshman. Okay, comes into the tournament, and Matthew, he's 25-0. And I checked the stats and all and stuff. So, and it doesn't come as a surprise that he makes the final. So he's up against Griffith from Stanford. But Keegan O'Toole does not allow a single point in his 4 matches up to the finals. So when we discuss about the finals, we'll have to see what happens there. But you got a freshman undefeated going into the makes his way into the finals at 165. Now at 174, so who do we have getting into the finals here? With just kind of see some upsets going on, and really there's no upsets that happen. The top 4 seeds, like at 125, make the finals, and it really comes down to Starachi, who is from Penn State, makes the finals, number 1 seed. Not a big surprise there. And Mekhi Lewis from Virginia Tech, who is also, number 2 seed. He actually pins Nhsca from Michigan. So there you go, right there again. Michigan getting some dreams dashed there. I think Michigan might have been able to do something. Hey, if Nhsca had pulled an upset, at least that would pull them closer. Not necessary. I don't know if it would be deemed within striking distance, but hey, that would put something on their side. Lewis gets the pin with 41 seconds left. So right here, you've got two champions, because Lewis had won, and then Starachi had also won a national title. So, another 1-2 matchup. So anything can happen here. It can go either way, don't you think? With a 1-2 matchup, plus they both have experience winning the national title.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, because you got 2 national champions, and they're going in there. They're the top seeds. Realistically, anything could happen.
So 184, we have another rematch of the Big Tens going into the finals, which is Miles Amin from Michigan, ranked the number 1 seed over Brooks from Penn State, who's the number 2 seed. And Matthew, I think this is just down, this will get down to who is more hungry. And Amin, he did his thing he upset Brooks at the Big Ten, which is why he was the number 1 seed. But one interesting thing I read about was how Amin actually represented the country of San Marino at the Tokyo Olympics, and he ended up getting a 3rd place medal for that.
Well, as you mentioned before, we had you're from SAC, you had Jesse Ruiz representing Mexico. So if it's the easier path, because the U.S., even though they're not known for their international top wrestling, like I don't know if they've ever won the world championship. I mean, have they at all? They might have won.
Maybe a couple times. That'll be something that's definitely on our agenda for looking up and checking.
They're known for good championships, but they're not known individual champions, but they're not known for strong teams. I do think they've actually pulled it off once or twice. But yeah, consistently they're not known for, but it's still, considering we have the 3rd highest populous nation in the world, it's still pretty difficult to actually get to the point where you're representing. So, Amin had an easier choice and he didn't. San Marino is not known for A, their wrestling, B, their particularly difficult qualifying events. So if that's what he chose to do, and it benefited him.
Yeah, I would say. So yeah, interesting to see what happens in that matchup. 197. So Matthew, I think, but I think the writing's been on the wall at this point, what's happening, because although here, Max Dean, who was apparently he was originally at another school. I'd have to look it up again. But Max Dean transferred out of, oh, that's right. He was at an Ivy League school. Let me make sure. Okay, so Max Dean was actually at Cornell. And Matthew, I'm sure you're aware, the Ivy League actually canceled their season. So they actually did not compete, last season, and then the 2021 national championships. So, I think for him, he decided that he really wanted to wrestle and stuff and continue improving himself. So he decides to transfer to Penn State. And, I think obviously when you get people that decide that they want to transfer, I'm sure there's a lot of mixed emotions around that, because you've got the people you were with versus the, where you're going. You never know how people are feeling about you leaving and then, people coming in. Are you going to turn out in a good way? But Dean makes for the 5th finalist for Penn State. So very sure that this is, indicating how the team standings are doing, which I will get to momentarily. But it's kind of hard to lose when you have 5 finalists getting in there, don't you think?
Yeah, it's when half of your team is in the finals. It's kind of difficult to somehow flub that. I mean, we talked the last week about how what's it called in the D3 managed to somehow lose their 3?
Oh yeah, Wartburg, where they had 6 semifinalists and 5 of them lost.
No, I was talking about the other team. Was it St. Cloud that almost upset them?
Well, D3, that was the Wartburg school. D2 was that was the fight between Kearney and St. Cloud.
Whoever made second, they had more finalists than Wartburg. I remember that. So.
Oh yeah, I'd have to.
It was one of those things where Wartburg.
Wabash University.
Yeah, Wabash flubbed it up completely. They just had to win 1 match and somehow managed to lose the championship. So and knowing Kale, I mean, I don't remember the last time he was within striking distance and lost. He since he's been going on this trail of dominance, he just doesn't do that.
Yeah, you're meaning he's leading after day 2. And even if most times when I've seen that there was a chance that, somebody might catch him, things had to go completely wrong for Penn State, and then things would have to go completely right for the other team in order for that to happen. And yes, you're right. When Cale is ahead, his wrestlers do not
Jump.
Right. So Max Dean, he's the 190. He's the first 197 semifinalist, and then you got Warner from Iowa, who upsets Nebraska. Schultz from Nebraska, the number 3 seed in the quarters. Then he upsets Buchanan from Wyoming in the semifinals, who was the number 2 seed. Him coming out of winning the Big 12s and such. So Warner is able to, for the tournament that Iowa was having, where it was clear that they were not going to defend their championship from last year, Warner was at least able to give Iowa a finalist and keep a streak going that's been happening since the 90s. So do you think that was at least an important thing for Iowa to at least keep that going, even though, they had pretty much lost the tournament at this point?
It's definitely it was definitely important, and it was like good for morale, because they were saying, well, at least we're keeping up a tradition. They've always had at least finalists. Not there were some years where they didn't necessarily have national champions, and they've been, since the 90s, since the Gable era ended, they've been on this up and down path, because you had Zaleski, who was able to go out of the gate with essentially Gable's people, and then he went down and he got fired. Then you had Brands come in. He got some, he lost some. And then recently he got at least another one. I mean, the likelihood is he would have won 2020 if it hadn't been for the pandemic.
He would have definitely won 2020.
Yeah, so obviously it's important for them to keep up this tradition. And like, I mentioned last week how, the differences of coaching and skills between Gable and not Gable and Brands, between
Brands and Zaleski.
No, Brands and Cale.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, it was but yeah, it's important, and it's just their way of saying, we're still in the wings. It's like we may not have won this one, but we're still within striking distance in the future. That's it, and keeping that streak up is important to them. Yeah.
So basically, you're gonna have Dean versus Warner in the finals for 197, and then you've got and it was good that Warner made the finals, because at heavyweight you had Wood from Lehigh upset Cassiope from Iowa. So if Warner hadn't won, then that means that tradition wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't be speaking about we'd be speaking about the tradition a lot more differently. But in the end, it did not matter, because Wood ended up losing to the number 2 seed Colton Schultz from ASU. So another wrestler representing the Pac-12, especially when it comes to ASU, because they are the only current school outside of the Big 10 and the Big 12, I believe, to have won a national title. So, and then of course, he is up against the man, the myth, the legend, some might call him, Gable Steveson, who has gone out. He went to Tokyo. He won a Olympic gold medal on a last-second takedown. So, you've got these are two monsters. Colton's a freshman, versus Steveson, who's, getting ready to finish his career at Minnesota. He's got so he's got a national title there. He's got a gold medal, offer from the WWE. So everyone's speculating that, when he wins this, is he going to actually retire? I think so. You've got a monster matchup, Matthew. What do you think about this monster matchup?
Well, heavyweight has kind of always been looked at in this certain way, even if there's kind of been years where it's not as impressive. But yeah, it was, but especially this year when you've got a returning Olympic gold medalist. Typically, if someone's winning Olympic gold medal, they're not going to college. That's a really recent phenomena where you have these guys going out and winning Olympic gold medals, just medals in general, and then coming back and wrestling.
Well, especially because, if you go on to win a gold medal, even with eligibility left in the NCAA, there's really nothing more to prove, don't you think?
Yeah, at that point, you'd think that it would just say, okay, because you're at the peak of the sport and the Olympics. It's like, well, what are you coming back here for?
But somehow Snyder came back. He decided to do it. He ended up being a 3-time national champion. You got Gable right here. He's coming out. He won the NCAA tournament. He then went out to Tokyo, won the gold medal, and now he's coming out here trying to pick up that second NCAA title. So, with that being said, Matthew, our top 5 standings after day 2. Penn State, 108 points, 6 All-Americans, 5 finalists. Michigan, 84.5 points, 6 All-Americans, but only 2 in the finals. Arizona State, 63 points, 5 All-Americans, 1 finalist. Iowa, 62 points, 5 All-Americans, 1 finalist. And your 5th place team replacing NC State, Nebraska, 5 All-Americans, 1 in the finals. So, with that being said, I mean, it pretty much looks like, especially with Penn State having 5 in the finals, that they pretty much wrapped this up by day 2. I mean, it was really down to Michigan and Iowa maybe pulling some upsets, but in the end, you've got these just Penn State being what they need to do. If they make the semis, they're pretty much going to be able to, they know how to work in the semis, don't you think?
Yeah, and this has been something that they've done consistently since the Kale era. If they make it to semis, most likely they're getting into the finals. There's been rarely situations where someone goes to semis and doesn't make it into the finals. And again, you have one of these dominant years. This has not been unheard of. When Kale has won, they've won dominantly.
So, pretty much, I don't know how there would be anything where they could, Michigan could somehow, pull off an upset, especially when you're down, what is this, 23.5 points. And then, but the other team still has a chance to pick up an extra 20 some odd points going into the, just with the finals alone. Because I think traditionally, if you win the finals by decision, that's 14 points right there. So kind of hard for Michigan to catch up at that point. It pretty much comes down to then who's going to take third, if it's ASU or Iowa or Nebraska somehow, pulling it off too. So with that being said, Matthew, let's get into the finals, how the finals went. I was able to watch it and kept you guys updated on that. So, let's go into it. Pretty much, so you had Suriano over Glory, winning by 5-3. And it was pretty much Suriano knew what he was doing. He gets his takedown early, makes sure that he can ride Glory. So, able to do his riding time. Although a couple of times, I could see that Suriano was pretty jumpy. He did get called for caution a few times, and there were a few. And I also saw how he would, especially when it came to the last period, because I believe that he was the one who had choice going into the last period. He seemed to try to ride it out, or more, he was taking down and then just not trying to get up from bottom. And, I guess if you feel like you can do that, I mean, if you want to try and do that, just try and ride it out. That's fine. I'm not a huge fan of trying to ride out, if you're ahead and then just trying to not do anything on bottom and end up getting stall calls. But in the end, he did get an escape with less than 30 seconds left. So he would go on to win the match 5-3. But Matthew, and so he did have, this is his second title. I believe, though, that this is the end of his collegiate career. But Matthew, from what you've seen of Suriano, do you think that maybe he might go on to try for the U.S. Open, maybe try for the Olympics, or do you think there's maybe other paths for Suriano, maybe even in MMA?
I would expect him to maybe make a run at the for the Olympics. And of course, the Olympics haven't only taken place last year because of the pandemic. He would have a shorter run. I would expect him to do that. Maybe try MMA afterwards, but it also depends on what his major was. I don't know what his major was. He might have a job lined up to where he could just go in and possibly make more money than he could as an MMA fighter, because as we know, only the top echelon of MMA fighters are making millions of dollars. That's when you're the UFC champion, or you're at least a headliner, and you're able to hype yourself up as this big guy, and you're winning consistently and making millions of dollars. You're a contender.
Mm-hmm.
That's a small minority. So if he's the type of guy who has a job lined up, then you would expect he would probably try wrestling. I wouldn't higher up, but I wouldn't expect him to be doing something like MMA if he has something better lined up. Because it's just better for your overall health, because you got like injuries, and then you got the CTE issues and stuff like that. So it just depends. He might not have something lined up. He might want to try MMA, but
so I am trying to look up his. I am on his bio right now at Michigan. Doesn't really say what his major is, but he did graduate from Rutgers in 2021. And I guess, that
means that he wrestled as a graduate.
Right. It probably means he wrestled as a graduate, but he took advantage of, the extra year eligibility that was granted by the NCAA, which I have no problem with either. I mean, hey, if you have a chance to go out there and go for it, I'd say go for it, So this could mean that he is, doing graduate. Again, we'll have to see. I mean, again, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell, if especially if this indication is such that he is, in graduate school right now, so he probably may end up doing, finishing up his degree. So he could be, again, he could try and go out and wrestle for the Olympics. And then, yeah, you're right. He could be trying to move into some kind of business thing going forward.
Well, like, I'm just going to throw an example out there in terms of like making top money. So Cole Conrad went out there, won the NCAAs a few times. I can't remember if he ever made it to the Olympics or anything like that, but he went into early Bellator, won the championship, but then all of a sudden he gets this opportunity to go into farm business, not the selling part, not the actual farming part, and make money. And he just chose in his, I think, like agriculture, to walk away from the sport.
Yeah.
So you got the opportunity to go for it. I mean, you don't you don't have to go through and endanger yourself and your body if you don't have to. So
133 RBY Roman Bravo Young of Penn State, number 1 versus Dayton Fix, number 2 from Oklahoma State. And RBY was one who also drew first blood early, getting the takedown over Fix. Fix did get an escape, but So apparently this had already taken a different turn based on how their match was going last year, where you had a scoreless first period, but in this case, you already had a 2-1 score by the end of the first. And then it pretty much turned into, both wrestlers getting escapes as necessary, and then RBY just able to play the game, taking shots where necessary, drawing the officials off of him in order to not get stall calls, which, it seemed to me that John Smith and a lot of people were hoping for stall calls. I mean, you could kind of hear it in DC's voice because he was, he was providing commentary during the broadcast. But
Did
in
he
the
ever say anything about his? Because obviously I wasn't able to see it. Did he ever say anything about his match with Kale?
So I don't know that he had much to say about his match with Kale, although, you could tell that he was very supportive of Oklahoma State guys, without, that goes without saying. But, in the end, RBY, the better wrestler, prevails, wins the rematch from last year's finals. And, kind of a tough break for Fix because, I was reading and, he ended up losing to Suriano in their matchup. Doesn't get to wrestle at 2020, loses to RBY last year and loses to RBY again. And, that's got to be tough when you make the finals and not able to win it, don't you think?
Yeah, well, it happens, and it's just one of those things that.
Well, that's, and, although it does look like, because I am looking up Fix right now, he has a redshirt junior, so he does have one more shot at it. Be interesting to see how he can do. Will he finally get it? Because Matthew, if you remember, Jake Varner from Bakersfield, he made the finals 2 years in a row. Actually, he was a 4-time finalist. He didn't win his first 2 years, but he did end up winning, the last 2 years.
He wrestled from Bakersfield in high school, but he wrestled in Iowa State.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
But yeah, well, the fact that he made it as a freshman, as a true freshman, as I recall, was impressive enough.
Mm-hmm.
But as I remember, he was on this like domination streak, like his last few years at wrestling. Like I remember watching at 5 counties, he pinned the guy. And then that's what he did when he was in state. He just went through pin
right.
on this
he went
pin.
To state, yeah, he did a lot of that too. Just monster wrestler. But, when he got to Iowa State, first 2 years, he made the finals, but couldn't pull it off. But it worked out for him in his junior and senior years. So we'll have to see if, Fix, because this is it for RBY. He's out. He's done. He's moving. He's going to be moving on to bigger and better things. We'll see if he makes a run for the Olympics or something else. But Fix, he's still got a year to go. We'll have to see. Will he finally get that championship that's been eluding him now for 3+ years technically? But it'd be interesting. So at 141, and this is where, and really, actually, I'm going to kind of throw it in here for 141 and 149 because you had Lee from Penn State, number 1 seed against number 15 seed Clark from UNC. Then you had at 149s, Jocko Mollis from Cornell versus number 10 Levette from Nebraska. And I think this was where it really showed who was the better wrestlers because both Lee and Jocko Mollis both defeated their wrestlers by more than 6 points. And Lee actually would have had a major if he had not, let Clark out in the last 2 seconds of the match. But still, he won by 10-3. Actually, what was surprising was Clark actually scored a takedown in the opening seconds of the match. And so he's up, but Lee gets out. And I think then, this was obviously Lee got caught off guard by that first takedown. And so then Lee, I think, made necessary adjustments, and then he just wrestled at his own pace. Clark just could not get out from bottom once Lee was riding him. Lee actually, trying to get turns in a couple of times, but Clark, would fight. But it just was the clear dominance, I think, showed in this case. And the same thing for, Diakomalis from Cornell, just doing what he does, and just Levet had no opportunity. So, these guys were able to make it to the finals. But I think, Matt, when you're the number one guy against, especially when it's someone that was able to fight their way through tooth and nail, but just, there is a bit of a difference in level. You think that keeping a clear head is what makes these guys number one?
Yeah, you've got to go in there and be able to have a clear mind and know exactly what you're going to do, and that's how you're able to pull it off and become a national champion.
And then you had at 157, you had Deacon from Northwestern against Quincy Monday from Princeton, and the match was actually pretty close. I do believe, if I were to look at the score, I believe was 2-2 going into the yes, it was 2-2 going into the third period. But so in the first period, Quincy Monday was the one who scored a takedown, and so he's up 2-1 by the end of the first period. And then you had Deacon. He took bottom, but he ended up getting ridden for the entire period. So Quincy Monday has an advantage going into the third period because he's up by riding time. And then, he's up. So he's up 2-1, and he's also got riding time. So that basically gives him a 3-1 advantage. But what ended up happening here was that it appears that, do I have this right? I need to make sure I have this right. Yes. So I think, I know what happened now. I think Quincy was hurt. Was that right? I'm not sure how to read this on track. Oh, sorry, my bad. Sorry, that's not what happened. I have it wrong. Deacon took bottom in the second period, and he got out with about 5 seconds into the period. So it's actually 2-2 at that point. And then Quincy was hit with a stall call, so he didn't get rid out. So it is 2-2. Quincy then in the third period decides to take neutral on choice. And what ends up happening was there was a scramble that was going on, and then it looked like, so they're in a scramble and they both got each other's legs. But, and then this is where the match was decided, was Quincy ends up getting himself on bottom, even though there's no takedown yet. He's on his back. And I don't know if you're aware, Matthew, but if you're on your back for an extended period, even if there's no control in collegiate wrestling, then there's the danger rule. And so the ref has to count the danger. He counts to 5. And if you haven't gotten off your back after danger, after the 5 count for danger, then he's going to give control to the other wrestler.
Is that a recent rule, James?
Yes, that rule has been applied probably within the last 4 to 5 years.
And I'm guessing that kind of it sounds like that kind of reflects freestyle wrestling.
Yeah, you could almost
where control is a lot more liberal.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think now I'm not sure how or why that was applied, but I think it just has to do with the fact that, people would be sticking on their, staying on their backs, not having any, not having the seed control. So I think to encourage people to, even if they're not seeding control, but they're not getting off their backs, I think they're just trying to stay there so that they can hope to get a what do you call that? A stalemate. So I think that they came up with this danger rule to encourage people to just not stay there and to actually move.
So it's essentially it was essentially a way to prevent stalling.
Yes, actually, that is probably a good way of looking at that, because the NCAA has had to come up with ways of encouraging people to wrestle, because you're going to see these close matches, and same thing in high school. They've told us, if our audiences don't remember, I do officiate, within the state of California, and they want us to call stalling more, especially when wrestlers aren't wrestling, when there's no action, or people. One of the common things that you'll see with wrestlers who really know how to play the edge or something is they'll kind of back themselves up to the edge, and then they'll take their shots, or they'll do some kind of pivot or something to make the other, make the action go out. So that's why they tell us, if you're actually seeing that a wrestler is playing the edge, hit him for a stall call. Anyway, going back to this danger situation. So what that meant was, hey, the ref got to his 5 count. He gives Deacon 2 for the takedown. And I think Monday didn't know that he had now seated control, and he was now on his back. And what ended up happening was, the ref got to a 4 count, and, 4 count in college means 4 points. So then now Deacon is up. He's just scored 6 points on Quincy Monday, and also riding time is going. And Monday could not get out after that, because then the situation ended up with, he did get off his back, but he let Deacon get around him, and Deacon pretty much rode him the rest of the match, plus riding time. So that's why the score ended up being 9-2. So kind of going back to the conversation we were having, Matthew, when you allow yourself in that situation, it's really tough to come back from, right?
Yeah, at that point, you've given away points that you were not expecting to, and then all of a sudden, it's just like, when you're that far deep, it's kind of hard to come back from it.
So that's how that happened, and it is what it is, and I'm not, but Monday, I'm sure he's a very good wrestler. Interesting. We'll have to see if he's going to be coming back. We'll check that at another date and time. But congrats to Deacon for the win there. So I want to go to 165s, which was Griffith from Stanford versus O'Toole of Missouri. And O'Toole, the undefeated wrestler, coming into this tournament as a freshman. And he hadn't given up any points this entire tournament. Well, that changed because Griffith got a takedown with about a minute 14 into the match. So those are the first points. I'm not even talking about escape points. This was the first points given up by O'Toole in this entire tournament. So finals can really change the pace of things, right, Matthew?
Yeah, that's definitely the case, especially when you've got something like that going on.
But O'Toole was able to get an escape. So the period ends 2-1. Now Keegan, he does go on bottom, trying to see what he can do. And so then we see that he gets an escape with about 17 seconds off the clock. So it's 2-2. But then Griffith strikes again, getting another takedown about 22 seconds later. So that means Griffith is up 4-2, but he ends up giving up a reversal to Keegan, which ties the match up 4-4, and he would get ridden out for the remainder of that period. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because now we're going to go into the third period, and it almost seems to me that Griffith might have gotten cold feet because he decides to take neutral. So possibly, do you think that he's not confident that he can ride O'Toole? But that could be another point where if you take bottom, because this was Griffith's choice, if he takes bottom, he probably thought that he could get ridden out for the entire period. Do you think that may have been why he chose neutral?
Yeah, that was probably the way that his mindset was going at that point. And like you said, he had cold feet and he decided to go with it.
Which ended up being, his downfall, because with a minute 13 left in the match, it's O'Toole that gets the takedown. And he ends up riding Griffith for a little short of 30 seconds, which means that with 34 seconds left, Griffith gets the escape. But now he's down 6-5. So, then it's like, so he has to really be active in trying to get that takedown to win the match. But in the end, O'Toole prevailed. And so O'Toole ends up winning the match 6-5, becoming a freshman winner and currently undefeated in his collegiate career. What's your opinion on that? So
well, we're just gonna have to see if he can match up with Kale, because while there have been four other four-time NCAA D1 champions, only one of them went undefeated across all.
Yeah, there's been four men have gone undefeated.
Yeah, only one of them went undefeated across their.
Right, four-time champions, and only one of them is undefeated.
And that just so happens to be the head coach of Penn State right now.
Yeah.
So it's possible. Could he become only the second to go undefeated? We'll just have to wait and see. He needs to keep it up. And he always needs to keep in mind there might be someone else who might give him a run for his money. Because Kale, for all those 4 years, one thing to remember, he redshirted his freshman year, so he had time to develop. But then on top of that, he had a few close matches. History could have gone very differently.
Yep. All right. So let's try and move this along, because I know that we'll be running short of time here. 174. Actually, this ended up turning out to be a very exciting match. It went both ways. You had Starachi from Penn State, Lewis from Virginia Tech. This thing ended up going where they were both on top of each other the entire time, and it did end up going to overtime. And at the end, it was the match was 4-4 going into overtime. Obviously, no sudden victory, so then you had to go into tiebreaker, and they've kind of redone the rules, Matthew. I don't know if you're aware about tiebreaker now in collegiate, where it pretty much comes down to the 30-30. It's who's going to have the most riding time at the end of that first tiebreaker. So in this case, Starachi.
So they do 1:30:30.
Right, they do 1:30:30, and then based on riding time, that determines if you win or not. Now, let's say that
Yeah, because I know at one point they did like I don't know how many.
it would basically, yeah, it used to go to whoever it was whoever scored, whoever was ahead at the end of, so you would do sudden victory, then you do a 30-30. If no one was ahead at that point, then you do another sudden victory and then 30-30 if necessary. So I remember there was a when Santa Ana won the state tournament for community college back in 2005. The Michael O'Hara, who ended up winning, he went to a 4 overtime basically, and that's how he so he went through that routine 4 times, sudden victory and then 30-30.
Did I mention that when I went out there, I said hi to him once when he was still at Lindenwood?
Yeah, and what did he say to you?
He acknowledged me. I mean, we weren't close. I knew him because of you.
Yeah, well, good for him. I hear he's still out there somewhere in Missouri. Who knows where, but it'd be great to meet up with him again at someday.
Well, I think he's stuck there. I don't know if he necessarily like got the opportunity to wrestle on the I don't know what opportunities he got. Just besides, I think it would have, by the time I got out there, he was probably towards the end of his eligibility anyway. That might have been his last season. In fact, I don't remember seeing him after that first year. So maybe he'd used up all his eligibility by that point.
So here's one thing. So Starachi got out after 7 seconds. So, and then what ended up happening was in the next 30, where it's Lewis's turn, he couldn't get out until there was 6 seconds left in the period. So when you have to consider that differential, so Starachi was only ridden for 7 seconds, and then Lewis was ridden for 24 seconds. So there's your difference, basically.
So Starachi wins.
So Starachi wins based on that differential. So that's how Starachi got the title. So at this point, Matthew, that means that it's 4 for 4 for Penn State.
Well, just going back to overtime, like I can't remember. I think in high school rules when I first got out here, they only did 2 OTs. So what happened was you had the minute of sudden victory, and then you had 30 seconds where it was either you get out or you don't. And if the person got out, that was the.
So yeah, and I remember because
I don't think I was ever caught in any of those scenarios.
So here's the thing: the rules have not changed as far as that situation goes. It's still a minute, and then you still do 2 30-second tiebreakers to see if someone can get out or not, and then you have an ultimate tiebreaker. And the ultimate tiebreaker is either whoever chooses down, and the choice in the ultimate tiebreaker goes to the person who scored first in the match. So what ends up happening there is if that person goes down, they have to get out. If they get ridden out, the other guy wins.
So that's how it is now, because that's not how I remember it back when I was. Of course, as we've talked about, rules have changed probably hundreds of times.
As far as I know, the rules haven't changed, because I remember, I think it was a league match. Because Stewart got really excited when he knew that whoever your teammate was that was involved in the ultimate tiebreaker, because the ultimate tiebreaker, it happened then too. I remember seeing it because
Stewart always got excited about stuff.
Because your teammate did have choice for the ultimate tiebreaker, and he ended up winning the match because he got out. So, yeah, Stewart was like, yeah, we're going down. We're going down. So, anyway.
Well, that could have been anybody.
Yeah. So, now Penn State's got 4 of 4 winners in the finals, and then you get into the I'm sorry, that's 3 of 3. Is it 3 of 3? Sorry, it was 3 of 3. So then you had Brooks versus Amin, so Big Ten, rematch, like we said. But Brooks, I think, learned from his losing at the Big Tens, because he pretty much, dominated. The final score was 5-3, but just looking at what I saw, Brooks was the more dominant wrestler. He was able to ride Amin more, and just could not let Amin really get an offensive going. So, so that in that sense, then you got Brooks being the winner at 184, and this is where we make it 4 of 4 for individual titles for Penn State, and so they've got one more to go. So what's going to happen there? Well, so this was a really close match. I'm not going to lie. It was Dean who, had transferred out from Cornell. He did win the match 3-2 over Warner from Iowa. And, this came down to, so here's the breakdown of that match, Matthew. It was 0-0 after the first period. Warner picked bottom, and so he's up 1-0 after only 15 seconds down. And then it pretty much was just another, after that it was scoreless. So you got another close match where, hey, it's 1-0 going into the third period. Now Dean does take down and he gets out. He's only ridden for 18 seconds. So you got a 1-1 matchup here. A classic setup for, an NCAA finals, basically. And, they're kind of filling each other out. But right here, 34 seconds remaining in the match, and Dean is able to get the takedown. And it's 8 seconds in the match remaining where Warner gets his escape. But by that point, it's just too late, because you can't make Dean, stall out with 7 seconds to go. And so Dean was able to hold his own. And, it's really, this is where it gets really competitive, right? The last 2 minutes of the match, and it can go either way when it's a takedown with 30 seconds left, right?
Yeah, if you got two guys who are that competitive and it's just, to the point where it's tied, then they're gonna try to find those opportunities, and the one who's just gonna find the opportunity to get the takedown is the one who's gonna win it.
So basically that gives Penn State 5 for 5. And Matthew, at this point, we don't even have to go into the team scores. I think it's safe to say that Penn State has won the title. Now we'll go over the team scores later, but it's hard to win
the title like 3 matches ago or something like that.
So the last match of the season, Gable Steveson versus Colton Schultz. And Matthew, this was pretty much Steveson. He had, although interestingly enough, he had not given up a point in the tournament, or he had not given up a takedown in the tournament until the semifinals. But he was determined not to give up a takedown here, because he, within first 6 seconds of the match, he gets the takedown. He rides Colton for about 37 seconds before letting him up. But then he does get another takedown and pretty much rides him out for the end of the period. So that's a 4-1 advantage for him, plus a minute 10 of riding time going into the second period. And so then he gets an escape with, after 4 seconds in the second period. And, pretty much from there, he's up 5-1, and I think at that point, you just have to be careful not to make any stupid moves, right? Going into the third period, up 5-1.
Yeah, at that point, you just have to not get pinned.
And Colton did get an escape early after 7 seconds, but you know, from there, it's just not much you can do at that point. And Steveson was able to hold him off, you know, hold off the freshman. And so this is the end right here for Steveson. Wins his second title, 6-2. And that's pretty much it. And Matthew, I don't know if you saw, but it looks like he made good on his you know, his intentions to the fans. He went out, wrestled, goes 5-0. And at the end there, after his interview, he did go to the center mat, gave him a nice backflip, and removed the shoes to leave them in the center of the mat.
Yeah, which for those who don't know, I think it's primarily an American wrestling tradition. I really haven't heard of too many international ones, but yeah, that's the tradition of you remove your shoes and you put them in the mat.
You are done with the sport.
Yeah, and that symbolizes that you're leaving the shoes to be filled by the next generation, essentially.
Yep.
I'm gonna be honest, and I don't blame Coach Jackson for not allowing me to do that, because it was you know, it was his call to send whoever it was. But one of the reasons why I personally wanted to go to regionals my senior year, I wanted to do that. If he'd allowed me the opportunity, my plan was to go out there and after the last match, don't care what it was, probably if I'd gotten the opportunity, I probably would have, you know, knowing the competition level, at most I would have gotten one win. I would have most likely would have gotten 2 and out. This would have been in the consolation. But my plan was that if I'd gotten the opportunity, I would have taken my shoes off and put them right there. I didn't get that opportunity, which incidentally, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I've thought about maybe giving another run in wrestling.
Same here. I think, you know, in a ways, you know, I think if you really haven't gone out on top, if you feel like there's stuff that, you know, there's still left to prove, even if it's been years gone by, you kind of feel that, hey, you want to give it another shot, you know. And so I think it's a good thing to have that competitive nature still in there.
Yeah, well, we'll just have to.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
So Matthew, to kind of cap it off. So again,
I am going to say this one thing about Gable Steveson. You know, if we've casually followed pro wrestling, we know that it's you know, like the most recent example, like Kurt Angle was probably the best example of an Olympic gold medalist getting a fast track into pro wrestling. I don't know how much time he did a developmental before he got thrust into the WWE and is going in there and win championships. And obviously it's choreographed, it's scripted, but you know, he went in there and obviously made it look competitive. Then Brock Lesnar comes in. Then Bobby Lashley comes in, and they come and go. They try their hands at MMA. Then first Brock comes back, then Bobby Lashley comes back, then Kurt Angle comes back. So even Rulon Gardner had the opportunity. He chose not to ultimately, but you know, he said he was offered the opportunity right after he beat Carellin. So and I wonder if maybe that's one of the reasons why he decided to come back, was to make him more marketable. But either way, obviously, if WWE said they're going to sign him, he's probably headed down to Florida to their training center to put him through NXT, and then, which is their developmental promotion, and then we're going to see him. The question is, are they going to know what to do with him? Because unfortunately, I don't. The recent trend with WWE is they don't necessarily know what to do with good people with potential, but that's just the script.
They can't find a way to bring in the next big star that can headline them like the days of the Attitude Era. Because you and I grew up in the Attitude Era.
That was a special era. It's often described as the last golden
Stone Cold, Undertaker, Kane, The Rock, Triple H.
Yeah, and even with what they have going right now, with kind of a new promotional war brewing between them and the new kid on the town, All Elite Wrestling. We're just gonna have to wait and see how things go. But yeah, we were in a very special time, so it was a golden era, and it's the ratings kind of show how things have sloped down. It's because they also had good storylines, good writers, which contributed to stuff like that. Whereas nowadays they've kind of gotten into this weird.
It's all watered down and stuff.
Yeah, it's watered. Well, that's another thing. The Attitude Era was TV 14. The people at live audiences.
Yeah, they had some pretty adult oriented storylines.
Not to mention, they got the people at the live showings got to hear profanity.
And a lot that, and then the girls in the divas and bikinis and all that stuff. Yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
that kind of, but yeah, that's yep. Times change. That's for
Times
sure.
change.
So anyway, Matt, just to kind of cap off the highlights. So again, Steveson moving on to the WWE. Penn State goes 5 for 5 in the finals. This is only the 5th time in NCAA history that a team has had 5 or more individual title winners. So the last team to do that was Penn State. Before that was Oklahoma State, which DC in an unbiased manner says that was the best team ever. And then before that was a couple of Iowa teams too. So again, looks like Penn State back on top. I did take a look at their roster. RBY and Lee, they are leaving because they are done. But
that's 2 of them, though.
That's
you
2
got
of
3 national champions coming back.
Right. Starachi and Brooks and Dean. If I'm looking at the roster correctly, Brooks is a junior. Starachi is actually, before I go to Starachi, where is Dean? Dean's also a junior. So that's two guys coming back for a senior year. For Starachi, he's a sophomore, and he won the tournament last year. So you know what that means, Matthew?
But another potential.
We have yet another potential 4-time winner. So, depends on who can rise up to challenge him, obviously. But again, it's looking good for him to add his name to that.
It's funny how you have all those legendary wrestlers, like between Gable and Kale, they have not produced another one.
Right.
John Smith produced Pat Smith, who was his brother.
Right.
But you didn't have.
It's a unique list of individuals. I mean, because what is it? You got Pat Smith from Oklahoma State, and yes,
you got Kale,
and then you got Kale from Iowa State, and then Dake, was from Cornell,
and then Logan Stieber, who was from Ohio
State.
Yeah, Ohio State.
So it's it gets really interesting where that's going, but then you have to consider. So I think yes, it's going to be an interesting couple of years coming up. Plenty of us that we're plenty of stuff that we're going to be able to talk about. I mean, going forward.
A few things. I looked over the statistics of both Gable and Cale. Gable retired in 97. That was a little over 20 years ago. He's now 70. What is he? 70. I think he's like 73 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have been coaching. Yeah, he's 73. He could have been coaching for a lot longer. Cale is 42. And I don't know if and we were talking about it before we started recording. Cale's at 9 titles, including this year.
Yes, this was his 9th title.
Gable won 15 total. So Cale has 8 years before he reaches 50. And he only needs 6 to beat Gable.
Yes, I think because I was making a list. Thank you for bringing that up. In fact, I'm gonna bring up try to bring up the list right now. I made a table based on and this table is actually available for our fans. This table is available on the NCAA's website. If you go to it, it does show all the title winners, and it will also show who came in second, what the team points were for first to second, and then it also shows who was the head coach of the winning team. And so, yes, Matthew, Gable has the most titles of any head coach in D1 history, and that's 15. There's only one other coach, and there's only one other coach who has at 10 plus titles, and that's E.C. Gallagher from Oklahoma State, who eventually pretty much started that program. And I think in some ways, I think he's considered pretty much the I don't know if you would call it the godfather or the father of collegiate wrestling. I mean, I don't know where collegiate wrestling would be if you didn't have E.C. Gallagher pioneering the sport the way it was. So he's got 11 titles. So Cale now has 9 titles, and he's the closest to actually make something really happen at this point. And but with this victory also, and by the way, everyone, so surprise, Penn State wins the national title. 131 and a half team points was the final result for Penn State. Second place was Michigan with 95 points, and it was Iowa. Iowa comes from behind over Arizona State, ends up with 74 team points to take that third place. But Arizona State does hold on to fourth with 66.5. Nebraska with 59.5. So that's your top 5 teams. So Matthew, 4 out of 5 Big Ten. I think that just holds that's just a testament to that conference's domination.
Yeah, but one thing we should probably point out is the one in the top 5 that was not the Big Ten.
ASU.
They is it Zeke? I forget. Is it Zeke Jones is the coach there
for ASU?
Yeah.
And then while I'm looking that up, Matthew, I think I think you did want to talk about Cale and the fact that he, where he's at right now in terms.
Yeah,
of
he's with it. He's over his coaching career. He's within striking distance. He definitely has that possibility. Like no other coach has had the opportunity that he's had.
Yeah, you're definitely right. Being 42 and at this point in his life, and I don't know.
Here's the thing. I don't think Gable thought that record was going to be broken. He might have gotten a few more. He might have gone a few more years if he thought that record was going to be broken. But it was one of those things where I think he'd already made that decision that regardless of what happened in that last season, he was retiring anyways. So all of his guys went out there and just wrestled for him. But here is and Kale wasn't even, I don't think he was even on the radar. He hadn't even started wrestling yet.
Oh, of course.
In college. He was just another high schooler.
You can't predict that this type of thing is gonna happen.
Yeah, it's like this passing of the torch was just, it's kind of funny how that timing just worked out. It's like he leaves wrestling. What happens? Kale starts this legendary run. But yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, I don't, and he was not out of involvement with the program completely. Like I think he was actually at one point the athletic director of Iowa. So he was definitely involved in Iowa athletics. He was in there. I don't know if he necessarily was involved in getting Zaleski removed like him. I don't think he necessarily said, "You're not the coach I thought you were." But he was definitely involved in getting brands installed. It was one of those things where it's like he was like, you know what? I think
Brands was one of his students.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where he was like, you know what? I screwed up. Let me try putting someone else in there and make up for this, which he clearly picked correctly. Brands has been a lot more consistent of a coach than Zaleski ever was. So
yes, ASU, it is Zeke Jones.
But yeah, going back to ASU, we got something interesting going on here.
You think so?
He's a unique. I don't know if he's going to be the next Bobby Douglas. I don't know. Because this is steady progression. I don't know if he is going to bring another championship to the Pac-12. I mean, that would be quite a coup if he did.
Well, he did bring a champion. You're talking about national title?
Yeah.
That'd be well, I think that comes down to what does his current roster look like, and then what does his recruiting class look like?
Well, it's clearly got a good recruiting class, and what he's able to do with it. Number 4, when was the last time you remember a Pac-12 program being number 4?
Been a while, and that's why I'm hoping to talk about.
What I can remember, it had to be like in the 90s when Bakersfield made 3rd. It was Iowa State, and Bakersfield. I like to say it was like 98 or 99 or something like that. Bakersfield's best year ever.
Yeah,
I think the late Tom Kasperai was still with the program.
Because I know that they had some All-Americans this year. I am looking at their. Actually, you could be right. Valencia is going to be graduating, and he didn't. I don't think he made All-American this year.
He's not like his brothers. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, a little bit of a different mold than his brother.
Well, that's kind of like how Kale brought his younger brother into Penn State. I don't think that guy he might have made All-American, but he was not a national champion.
Right. But I mean, I'm looking at their I am looking at their roster right now, and so far I'm seeing, Anthony Valencia is in there, but other than that, Matthew, that's really the only senior that's leaving. Everyone else is junior, and over half of their team are either true or redshirt freshmen. So
we'll just have to wait and see. But the next few years could be very interesting in NCAA D1 wrestling.
Also, yeah, here's this. They have a 33-pounder, Cleveland Belton. If you want to guess, try to guess the connection between ASU and a certain high school out here in California.
Is he a Calvary Chapel guy?
No, you're in the right direction, but another one. Think Valencia.
El Dorado?
No,
Bosco?
Bosco. So it seems to me
Does
that
he have some kind of connection with Bosco?
that's a good question. Although, you know what? They do have that's right. Here he is. The third Valencia brother is at ASU as well. So I think it's going to be interesting, don't you think? Yeah. ASU.
It might have been one of those things where just piggybacked, where maybe one of the Bosco teammates piggybacked off of the Valencias.
Mm-hmm.
It may not have been like a Zeke Jones personal connection to Bosco. It might have just been a connection related to the Valencias.
Good point. Anyway, so that's where we're at, Matthew. I also do want to point out that we could see a 4-time national champion history made again next year because Giacomolis from Cornell, he does have a year of eligibility left. This was his 3rd championship. So we could see, a couple things we could be seeing happen next year if Giacomolis comes out and if he does win, we could see Cornell becoming the first team to have more than one 4-time winner.
That would be interesting.
Starace, if he can do it next year, keep the streak up, then he would have a chance to repeat it in 2024. And O'Toole, right now, so far, undefeated and freshman winner. So he could be going down that Kale path. Who knows? One thing I will have to say, though, in closing about the tournament, in all the finals, if the number 1 was not in the finals, the number 2 was, and the number 2 ended up winning those matches. And then I believe, except for 184, all the number 1 seeds ended up winning their matches. So not really anything of an upset, I think, especially, Brooks was probably the number 1 person in the country before he lost to Amin at the Big Tens. So I would not really consider that an upset either. So in the end, I don't know that I could say that there weren't really any upsets for this tournament. Don't you think so?
I would have to say so. I mean, you had the higher seeds winning.
Right. Aside from 184. So with that said, though, Penn State, this is number 10. So they are now the 3rd team in NCAA history to have double-digit national title numbers. And judging based on what we're saying, this is probably not going to slow down anytime soon. Oklahoma State still has the record. Iowa still has their record, but Penn State could be making a move, in the next decade or 2.
I doubt that. Kale's definitely not winning 34 titles or total, but he could definitely edge Penn State up there. But whether,
well, I definitely, in my mind, definitely he could make a run for passing Iowa.
He could at least make a run for beating Gable's record. That's what he could definitely do.
The 15 titles as a coach.
I think 16 is easy. I think 16 is easily within his range.
Okay.
Like I said, 42.
Yep.
He's got 8 years before 50.
All right. So with that being said, season's over. That's the end.
And one last quick thing that I wanted to bring up is that from March 25th to the 27th is the 2020 NHSCA High School Nationals, which you said is a USAA tournament, but it is invite only. And this is a tournament where, depending on what state you're in, it's either the state champions or the state All-Americans. Like in California, it's the state All-Americans. You take 8 per weight class. I guess for all the other states, it would depend on it would just depend because California is very weird because we're the largest state in the nation and we only have one tournament. Most other states have state tournaments based off of divisions, which is school size. So, and I know there's been recent talks about splitting up the tournament, but it hasn't come to fruition, at least not yet. And I'm sure that the pandemic probably stalled things there as well. But this tournament, this is an invite-only tournament for, it might be the state champion. Like I said, the criteria solely depends on the state. Some of them might get to send their finalists, some of them the state champions only. And in the case of like California, you get to send all your All-Americans. And I don't really know how it turns out in terms of like, well, let's see who does what in the it's just a postseason tournament. It's just a tournament, and it's invite only, and not all the wrestlers have to do it. So,
all right, cool. Yep, that should be interesting. Maybe we can report on that next week, hopefully. And a couple other things. Want to. As we all know, women's wrestling is an emerging sport in the NCAA. So we're really hoping that that will help them out because that also helps out men's programs, and hopefully we can get more men's programs to emerge.
And this is in relation to the 1D3 program that's starting.
Yes, and by the way, a huge shout out to Wrestler Report on Instagram. They reported that D3 school Marymount University of Virginia will be adding a men's wrestling program for the upcoming 22-23 season, and they will also be adding women's wrestling for the upcoming 23-24 season. So again, a shout out to Wrestler Report on Instagram for reporting that. Thank you for providing us behind the scenes information and reports. And so to our audience, please make sure that you look them up and give them a follow so that you can get wrestling news like that. So Matthew, with that being said, we do hope, now we're going to get into the international season, a lot of things to talk about, but, we're going to try and keep our members up to date. And, we also will try to talk about who we would predict to be coming back, who could be making a run for those titles for next year. So we'll
also Japanese high school season's coming up.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and close this episode out. Thank you all for watching and listening. Matthew, as again, thank you for your commentary, going it firsthand. And so again, please make sure that you follow Matthew. He does write for the website mma-freak.com, and you can also follow him on Twitter as well. And
my Twitter and Instagram is at Matthew Salzer. And MMA Freak Twitter is at MMA Freakout. And then
Matthew, just make sure, can you give our audience the the places where we're also at besides YouTube.
Okay, in addition to YouTube, we are on Rumble, Acast, Apple, Spotify, and now Google. We will probably be adding more platforms in the future.
All right. So,
And also, we will probably be posting clips of our show in the future as well.
all right. So with that being said, everyone, we'll be closing this out and hope you have a great rest of your week. And until then, take care.